Welcome to What CEOs Talk About. Do you wonder what CEOs talk about behind closed doors? How they bring their vision to reality? How do they overcome and succeed through adversity? We share that and so much more with each episode. Now, let's get started with the show.
Hello, everybody. My name is Martin Hunter. I'm the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate vision into frontline strategies. Today, my business partner, Dylan Jones, he is the head of strategy, strategist galore, the guy who thinks about living in the future and is amazing at what he does. Dylan, thank you for being on the show today.
Thanks for having me, Martin. I'm excited to finally get on.
Yeah, absolutely. This is part of, so no sponsorship message today. This is part of interviewing the URGEO team so that you guys know who we work with and how we bring such value to the clients that we work with. So Dylan, tell us a little bit about your, actually, before we go there, what is the title of the show?
Title today is 5 Ideas for Recession Planning, or 5 things you should be thinking about for recession planning in the 2022-2023.
Very topical. I think this is going to be an amazing episode where people are going to draw a lot of tools out, a lot of things to think about. And like always, I always say there's a Japanese saying that, vision without action is a dream. Action without vision is a nightmare. So Dylan and I have spent time in Japan, both on different times. So I think this episode is really going to be critical at identifying a key direction to be able to not just survive a potential recession, but really actually thrive in it. So Dylan, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where do you come from? Let's give the listeners the opportunity to find out who Dylan Jones is as a character.
Yeah, cool. I am from Vancouver, Canada, as you know. Still live just outside of the big city. And probably will stick around for a little while longer in this very expensive but very, very beautiful city. I've been an entrepreneur for, it's got to be about 10 years or more now. So I started off in the mining industry in operations, then switched to finance and doing deal flow, building projects, working on developing new projects, companies, properties, things like that, and then switched to being an entrepreneur after I got a little bit tired of the corporate world, and have been in tech, CPG, and now in consulting. So consulting is obviously where we're building URGEO and where my time is being put, and really liking it.
Good. So tell us, Dylan, what made you think about the title of the show today? What drew you to having this conversation? Out of all the strategic things that you think about with all the clients that we have, why recession?
Well, it's funny because it goes back a long way to like 2008. So I was in university in 2008 and 9 when the last really big kind of non-COVID recession market crash happened. And coming out of university post that crash, there wasn't a lot of job prospects. It was kind of take what you can get. Market was still very much recovering. People weren't hiring a ton. Cash flow was pretty low for a lot of organizations that I would naturally go into. And it got me thinking even way back then, and just hearing these companies going, what they went through is, well, a bunch of companies came out really hot. And some of them are the massive companies we see today. And it drove a lot of innovation as businesses that weren't prepared, just had to leave the market, right? So they left the market. New businesses came in to take their place at all over different verticals. And I mean, the best example is people who had a little bit of money were able to buy up property at basically pennies on the dollar. And 10 years later in the bull market, housing prices or property prices all over North America, especially where I'm from in Vancouver, are like all-time high. If you were buying $200,000 to $300,000 houses in Vancouver in 2009, you're selling them for 1.5, 1.8 million today. So it would have been nice to have a little bit of cash back then, but unfortunately I was a student, so I had negative amounts of cash.
Yeah, I was gonna say you owed money.
Yeah, still very much owed money. So as this I've been through COVID, I've been through some downturns, but this is a big recession, I think, that's coming. We're seeing it already in the markets, and I think it's a pretty natural. Like, it's not the scariest thing in the world. It's just part of the natural
Mhm.
cycle of capitalism and what we go through. Rising interest rates, of course, is a big pusher for that, and inflation issues. So I've been talking to my clients a lot about what they're doing to prepare now, or even like 3 months ago we were talking about it, or 6 months ago in for some of them. And rather than going into a recession hoping that revenue won't go down, or your employees won't quit, or your market won't collapse, it's like, okay, like, it's probably going to happen, so why don't we take a step back, figure out some things that will help going into the recession, so that when you come out, right, you're in your position to take over a huge amount of the market and grow really profitably. Not just grow, but grow profitably. Because once that recession is over and the bull starts getting excited again, it typically goes pretty hard.
People tend to forget that recession is not necessarily a bad thing, right? It is an adjustment. And I think that is critical. I think that, like a business, you invest in growth or you invest in profitability. It's very difficult to do the same, right? So you're going for revenue, you're spending more, then you kind of go down a little bit and increase profitability. I think the people tend to forget that the term prosperity or wealth is just spending less than you make. And I think that that's something that a lot of companies should think about in this kind of, I don't want to say looming, because like you, I don't want to say that, oh, it's drastic, it's going to kill everything. I don't think it's going to be. We're a little bit more ready for it, but still, what's the number one? What's the first thing that, Dylan, if we've got 5 things, what's the first one that you want to mention and talk about?
I think my heart is drawn towards talking about cash flow management, but I think let's save that for the last.
Okay.
Just because it frames so much, and really talk about employee transformation and growth. And I think the reason I'll talk about that first is a recession is a time to invest in your team, in such a huge way, right? Succession planning for people who want to move up in the business, coaching people in, coaching people out. A lot of my clients, it was kind of the last thing they were thinking about, is what their employees were doing, because they were so focused on how do we survive a recession. And it's like, well, you're not going to survive a recession if you can't pay your employees, if you don't have good prospects for them to learn and build their career, and you don't really help them succeed and help them, what do you always say, elevate and celebrate, right? So yeah, employee transformation and growth is really where I think anyone in the small business or even medium-sized business should be thinking for the next couple of years, is who am I going to bring in to run certain departments or certain teams, and how can I help them grow, not so much to the overall like revenue benefit of my company, but again, planning for that post-recession period, so your team is totally trained up and ready to rock in like a year or 2 years or whenever we get out.
And even during the recession, I think there's a chapter in one of Simon Sinek's book that mentions somebody who went through the recession, and the leader went to the team and said, "Hey, listen, guys, I don't know. The only solution that I have is laying off people." And what they decided is they didn't lay off anybody. Everybody took leave without pay. The management, the CEOs. And they rotated, and they said, well, people working on the line manufacturing took a week off without pay. And then the managers would take 2 weeks off, and then the executive would take 3 weeks off. And what happened is that they would swap. The executive found time to breathe and relax and enjoy life, and gave their time to, 2 weeks worth of an executive not working was worth 4 laborers on the ground. So they all pulled together. And I think the key thing to what you're mentioning is that elevation of empowering your team, bringing your team together and saying, hey, like, how are we going to not just survive, but thrive during the recession so that when we come out, and the data from, Simon pulled out is that they came out not just surviving, but they blasted through. And then when they came back up, like growth was like 300%. It was
Yeah,
crazy.
that's the tribe mentality. It's funny. That was my very similar to my real world example. A friend of mine owns it's like an event programming for
Mm-hmm.
weddings. They do DJ rentals and photo rentals and all that stuff all across
Mm-hmm.
Canada. And at the start of COVID, obviously that industry took a nosedive. Everything was
Mm-hmm.
closed, and he did the same thing. He went to his employees and said, "Listen, I'm just gonna not take I'm just gonna take no money out of this company for
Mm-hmm.
myself. But if I don't lay off half of you, like we don't have any events to do. And this is an event execution company. Like,
Mm-hmm.
what are we supposed to do?" So the first thing they did was have a really deep strategy plan. It's like, what can we do if weddings aren't happening? And they looked at,
Mm-hmm.
corporate events. They looked at digital events, helping people figure webinars out, hosting DJs on YouTube and taking a small amount of ad revenue from views. They
Oh
figured
wow.
out a bunch of different things that, they were, some were very successful, some were marginally successful, but they brought in a little bit of revenue. And then I think the entire team, if not most of the team, um, agreed to a pay cut. And he said, as soon as he was very transparent, right? As soon as we're back to these revenue levels and these profitability levels, everyone gets their wage back
Mm-hmm.
plus a big bonus and a raise because you guys are, awesome.
Mm-hmm.
And now, for the last, I guess it would be what, 6 months since like kind of the states has opened up.
Mm-hmm.
His business has been rocking and rolling, doing really, really well. Gotten a great name for itself as a great place to work, but also as a great place to get things done because they're innovative now. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's not that we want to offer cutting pay to anyone, including owners and operators, but it is something to
Mm-hmm.
start thinking about. Is how do I be innovative in offering my employees a living while
Mm-hmm.
resolving whatever recession based issues are. And it's so different by company to company. If you're like a renovation company, for high end customers, you're probably not going to have to go through that. You might even
Yeah.
have the pick, like be able to pick really, really good new employees, because some
Mm-hmm.
of the other companies aren't able to survive. And then you have to focus on culture, right? You can't just wash in and out a bunch of new employees. You have to figure out how you bring people in and build up your company culture. um, Whereas, again, like if you're in the middle of a recession, if you're maybe a mid-level retail store, you're gonna suffer. You're gonna have to figure out how to make your employees bring in more while also you putting out less.
I think before we just move to number two, I think one of the key things that came out from our conversation is really, just because you're the leader, CEO, founder, co-founder, doesn't mean that you have all the answers. Don't be afraid to seek out
Absolutely.
advice. Don't be afraid to ask for help. Asking never kills, doesn't cost you millions. Oftentimes, just by asking, you'll get some options. Just be curious about different ways of operating that are not, and team, I always say transformational over transactional. Think, if you're not able to do change management, then you're going to
Hmm.
die. Evolution succeeds, especially in this
Hmm.
changing
For
market.
sure.
What's your number two? What's point number two that
So I'm
we
going to
should
tie
address?
2 and 3 together, because they're all about marketing. Um,
Okay.
Pretty well known just across the board in business. When recession comes, marketing budgets get slashed and marketing team gets
Uh,
kicked
Chop.
out the door. That's like the traditional way of doing it. And then of course I was like, my revenues drop. And it's like, well, you just killed your marketing budget by 75%. What did you expect? So this is the big one that I'm working on with all my clients. We've built out pretty in detailed spreadsheets, to list out all of our marketing activities and apply return on investment metrics to them.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's two things to think about. You shouldn't be looking at cutting your marketing budget in a recession. You should be looking at diverting budget to more profitable centers. Um, So
Ah.
in a growth market like we have been in, like you have the room and you have the money to test, right? To be testing and building
Mm-hmm.
out new ideas, new campaigns that might not be profitable, but at least you're learning more about your customer groups, your personas, building
Mm-hmm.
out your journeys and things like that. In When we're planning the budget in a recession, there's two things to bear in mind. The first one is everyone else is slashing their marketing budget. So all those things you're bidding on, if you're doing a paid ad strategy, just got a lot cheaper.
Oh, you get
They just
bumped
got a
up.
lot
Oh,
cheaper
yeah.
because there's less bids, right? So if people
Mm.
for the listeners don't fully know how pay-per-click campaigns work, you go on Google, Facebook, whatever, um, and you bid against other companies for keywords. So it might be best home renovation company in Vancouver. Well, a lot of people are going to bid on that because they want to be on the top on Google,
Mm-hmm.
and everyone knows if you're kind of not the top three area or spots on Google,
Mm-hmm.
you're probably not going to get a lot of clicks. So uh, in those with all those companies leaving those bids behind, it's a really good opportunity to up those bids in the places that have really strong ROI. So this is something that it gets more technical. So like a CMO, an agency, marketing manager will know this, very, very deeply through and through. But it's time now, if not, you're not going to do this, to really look at where your best return on investment for your budget is and start leaning into a strategy that says, okay, we're going to focus on, the 70% best. So we are going to cut some budget in the
Mm-hmm.
experimental areas, but we're going to bump that budget up in the places that really provide us. So this provides two benefits. One, it keeps your revenue up in your core areas. The second is
Mm-hmm.
it on Google specifically is it ups your authority over time. So post recession, you're now a leader
Mm-hmm.
in those keywords. You're now a leader in those spaces. Uh, Gives you a great advantage going post recession with your marketing budget to increase the marketing budget and continue growing out those keyword groups or those customer personas,
Mm-hmm.
um, building out those journeys, so to speak. So the part of this that's kind of point three, like call it 2.53, is digging into your metrics. So it's kind of like Google's great and so is Facebook for doing paid ads, but they also push you in the way that they want because they want you to continually increase ad spend, right?
Yeah,
That's all
your
they
ad
want.
spend.
They
Yeah.
don't really care about your success. So they report metrics that kind of inform that you should put more money into ads. So things like marketing qualified leads, the MQL, everyone's going for like, we have 10,000 MQL. It's like, okay, so how many closes or like how many conversions do you get? Oh, two. So it's like, okay, well, let's get away from this idea of the MQL for a while. Like get away from these qualified leads and get into engagement, build a community. So now is a great time. You see a lot more people posting on LinkedIn, getting blogs out, writing your thoughts, hosting small events, doing a podcast. Awesome. Time to build a community, build demand for what you're doing by being, a leader in this space.
Dylan, there's so many things to unpack from what you just mentioned. I think the number one thing for the listeners, Dylan tells me and the team all the time, we don't pay employees with followers. You can have 10,000 followers, but if it's not converting, like Dylan mentioned, what's the value added to having 10,000 followers? Nothing. It brings nothing. Now, we say nothing. If you're if you're on social media and you get paid for those followers and people pay you, but as a small business, the way that we're talking about marketing and followers, it's to really drive those 100, 1,000 clients that absolutely love where you scratch their itch, right? The
Mm-hmm.
services that you offer really creates a community. For the businesses that we're talking about, if you're a small to medium enterprise up to 250, 250 employees, you're making in around 5 million plus, the value of having that engagement, that transparency throughout the recession, regardless if it's recession, because what Dylan is saying makes sense not just in recession, but all the time. Reevaluate your budget. Make sure that you're spending the money in the right places, right? You're just putting a little bit more emphasis on making sure that you're fine tuning it. So the frequency at which you verify it is a little bit more specific, a little bit less money to test out. But the critical path is there's so many examples of people that have come to a strategic buyer and saying, or the strategic buyers doing interviews with the clients, and they go, the clients absolutely love you. They love what you do. And I think that it speaks to what Dylan is saying, is being transparent in your marketing and being very focused on who you actually serve. And this is something that we have struggled with because we bring such a wide range of skills at URGEO. Being agnostic is not the right thing to do. Maybe when you first start off as things come in, but evaluate the channels and the industries that you service, because this is now the time to be very focused. So to prosper, I mean, there's so many things to work off of. But I think the key thing is, number one, ultra focused on your ideal client profile. And I mean by that, don't be afraid to span out a little bit, still do a little bit of testing, what Dylan is saying, but really focus on KPIs that add value to you, your customer, and the transaction that is built around you and your customers. We're lucky enough as a small, medium enterprise that you don't have a board of directors, that you don't have stakeholders, you don't have to answer to investors because your revenues have dropped. Now, that might be the case for some, but ultimately, if you put your clients and your employees first in that recession by marketing that relationship, I think there's a lot to draw from that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think just to simplify it is think of for a listener, think of something that you absolutely love, right? Like whether it can be online or physical purchase. And in a recession, when you have to watch your spending, you're still going to buy that. You're still going to buy that thing you love that makes your life better, your family's life better, or your business's life better, which maybe is a more appropriate example. Now, think of something that you're just learning about. You clicked on it once, you went to the website, you looked at its Instagram. Maybe you talk, if it's a B2B thing, maybe even talk to someone. And what are you going to say? You're probably like, let's wait 6 months. If I really need it in 6 months, I'll buy it then. And I think that's the mindset shift for a lot of businesses in a recession period, is build the fan, right? Build the community. So we're there like every month or every 2 months or 3 months, whatever your sales cycle is. They're thinking, well, I have to work with these guys because I'm a fan. Like, I like working with them. They make me better. They make my business better. And those things that I'm kind of learning about and seem really interesting, I'll wait 6 months, I'll wait a year, whatever. That is the real, like, down to the brass tacks, how to get out of that cycle is, again, build the fan, build the communities. They won't, the purchase for them is, at that point, it's not really based on, it's not based on budget. It's based on the results you're already providing, right? So the final note on marketing is, right now is a great, I can't remember who said this. I'm definitely stealing this from someone, but I can't remember who. So uncredited is.
We'll just say we're not stealing. We're just going to quote it.
Yeah, give away your secrets for free, but charge for the implementation.
Ooh.
Yeah,
I like that one.
Whoever can Google that, you'll find it pretty quick, probably. I know, but that I've heard that everybody like that, especially right now. Is if you give away complex problem solving, a client can't implement it because they don't know how. Like, Salesforce is the master at this, right?
Yeah.
Here's your $1,000 a month CRM with no features set up, no program set up. So you have to come charge a $50,000 a month consultant to do it for you. It's like, they're too good at it. They've gone the other direction.
Yeah, I agree. It's so similar. I interviewed AJ, which is the episode is going to come out after this, about writing a book. And she always says in there, what services are you offering in your book? Like, when somebody reads your book, which is very similar to business, how will it change who I am? why should I invest in this? And how is this going to make me a better person, a better hiker, a better, when you look at people buy things for how they see themselves in the future. So if they need something to survive or thrive during the recession, think about that, right? Think about the messaging that you're going to, because Dylan nailed it and said, okay, well, do I need it? Do I want it? And if I need it, can I afford it? And if I want it, can I afford it? Right? For the benefit of transformation. Like, it's going to make me a better podcaster if I bet this bigger, better microphone, something like that. Or can I wait? So there's a lot of behavioral based stuff in there that you should pull apart and really ask the question. And again, implementation is a key component, not just coming up, okay, well, I know who we are, but how do we tell the story is a critical component.
Absolutely.
What is number 4?
So number 4 is supply chain management. And that kind of, it encompasses a lot, obviously. The broad strokes are, what are your terms with all your suppliers? Can you renegotiate? Go for 90-day terms, 120-day terms. Have you talked to your bank about fixed rate lines of credit, fixed rate loans, operating loans, so you can cover cash flow needs that might come up, but you're not going to get smoked by interest rates for the next couple of years. These are the more, like, they're not as sexy, they're kind of boring things that you as a business owner, I think, and I recommend to all my clients, is like, you should be talking to your banker right now. What are they saying about how much money you can get, especially if you're cashed up, especially if you raised money, is go to get a huge line of credit. You don't have to pull from it, but you have it there if you need it. We had good examples. We had a client who had a high-tech component that he got from a single distribution point that he needed. It was critical for his high-end service in the home space. And he got a notification from his supplier saying, hey, we have a couple containers in the warehouse. I recommend you buy it now. It was like a few $100,000, which he was a bit low on cash. So he was like, I don't know if I can buy it. He's like, I recommend you buy it now because the lead time after this shipment has gone from 3 months to 18 months. And
holy shit.
Yeah, it was like, he asked me, what do I do? I'm like, buy it, because in 18 months you'll be out of business. And there's been a lot of supply chain issues and talk over the COVID period, but it is something to start looking at, is negotiating with your suppliers and figuring out if you need to switch suppliers. Like, everyone has a great relationship with their supplier until the supplier stops providing them what they need. So they don't feel that the need to not have multiple options in place, more robust catalog of whatever your product, or I guess more just product side instead of service, but whatever your product is to offer to your clients. That this type of supply chain management is critical. I mean, it's kind of always critical, but in a growth period, you can let it slide a little bit, right? Like, you have so many other things, big sales teams and revenue numbers and all that. But again, now it's recession time. Getting in there and becoming more efficient, right? Like, that's what URGEO always talks about. We always talk about internally with one another, is how to become more efficient. There's so many tools to do it. And something that I've been thinking more about is we've been building our own consulting business, so we don't have products. Our supply chain is very, very SaaS, like platform based SaaS. What are we getting out of all these SaaS things we have? What are we getting out of all these platforms we use? Are we actually making any money from using any of them? Or are they just bogging us down with like fake efficiency? I see that a lot. Companies start, maybe the owner or operator comes from a big company and starts his own or her own. And so, at that big, $50-60 million a year company I was working for, we had these platforms. So I'm going to go get them. And next thing you know, you're paying $1,500, $2,000 a month in subscription fees for a company that does about $1 million or $2 million in revenue. Like, this doesn't make any sense. Like, do it all on spreadsheets or do it all on a free CRM or whatever.
Nothing wrong with Excel.
No, like, a lot of people, Amazon's run on Excel. So anyone who doesn't know the back end of Amazon, it's all Excel. So You can't tell me that our company is too big to run on Excel. It's Amazon does it.
There is so my very good friend, he buys FTL's full truckloads of products, and it's $30,000. Last week we're going out for coffee, and he tells me, "Hey, I'm just talking business and stuff like that." He says, "I just got a notice from my longtime supplier, like 15 years supplier." Okay, he says, "Hey, uh, Mr. X, I've got a great, they go golfing. They've got a great relationship." And he says, "I have to start charging you $3,000 for that because they didn't charge the shipping fee because they were buying $30,000 every month or something like that. And now they're like, okay, here's an extra, here's an extra $5,000 to have to deliver $30,000. That's a huge increase,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the question is, do you have, like Dylan was saying, if you're a large corporation, you've got flex in your warehousing, you've got flex in your WIP, work in progress, you've got flex because you got enough cash. If you're doing just in time delivery in a recession, you have to stockpile a little bit more, I think, and you need to be
Yeah, I
able
agree.
to, have a cash balance that will withstand, and then that will lead into the final conversations that we have, the fifth point. And I think what Dylan is really saying that I want people to attach yourself to is diversification is key. When you grow a garden, my wife loves gardening. She grows lettuce, she grows radishes, she grows carrots because she diversifies it because of a couple of things. She wants to bring different bees to it. What happens if the lettuce doesn't grow? What happens if the cucumbers don't grow? What happens
Mm-hmm.
if, I don't know, these little green things come in and eat all the peas, right? So I think that having a too finely tuned uh, logistics, sometimes without diversification, I think it's well worth to invest, even if you're not getting the best price, to diversify, because that's risk management, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And that's it. This is where, you know, whether you're owner operator or CEO, your CEO should shine. This is where, for
Mm-hmm.
me, like a CEO is a growth. There's very specific needs for both positions, but a CEO is very, very valuable during growth times. A COO is more valuable
Mm-hmm.
during recession times than a CEO, in my opinion. I know there's probably lots and lots of people who are like,
Agreed.
"Ah, it's totally wrong," but um, anyone who can dig into this type of supply chain and bring out the efficiencies and resolve those, especially for just-in-time companies during this time, is very valuable.
Give us, what are your strategies before we move to point number 5? What are some of the strategies that people should work on in regards to supply chain? Because so what you said to me was really critical. How do they identify where potential gaps are going to be? Do they look at different ways to tackle the process itself? Where do you think, what kind of a good tool would you give them to say, well, here's, critical areas that you should look at in regards to amassing your products before production or something?
Yeah, demand planning, it would be like the phrase I would use. And like, so what is demand
Mm-hmm.
planning? Work building out wireframes or workflows or mind maps, however your brain works. Some people just write it down on in
Mm-hmm.
numbers, on what your key products are. So your key product and key services, how do you deliver them? How do you fulfill demand,
Mm-hmm.
right? Demand planning, providing supply.
Mm-hmm.
So figure out what your products are, if you haven't already, and all the little components that go into them. And then you have to assign lead times. So a lot of businesses at I'd say between 1 and 10 million, even maybe up to 15. 15 is maybe pushing it a little bit. Um, they just phone their supplier and order it when they need it, right? Like there's not a
Mm-hmm.
lot of demand planning. It's, oh, we're out of widget A
Mm-hmm.
or out of bag B.
Mm-hmm.
Just give Steve over at whatever supplier I call and get some more. I'm always shocked about how like how big a company can be and how little demand planning they do. So digging in with your revenue teams, this is where like um, more and more, for maybe the last 5 years, it's less like sales and marketing. It's more revenue operations. You hear rev ops a lot, revenue operations, and that's sales, marketing, and customer experience or customer service all under the same banner. Um, that rev ops team needs to be working with the demand team and the ops team on, hey, we're expecting to invest this much in marketing and customer experience, which results in this much in sales. So it's like A equals B, but so B needs to equal C because C is what we need to sell them. So again, this is more product based or production based, like manufacturing or construction. But if you can actually, this just happened in Vancouver where a company pre-sold. I don't know if you heard about this, but they pre-sold like, I don't know, millions of dollars worth of townhomes without having locked down supply chain agreements, and they were like 6 months behind. And so in that case, the development company had to fork out like all of the deposits plus penalties back, and basically went under because at some point in their process they weren't getting enough, whatever it was, I don't know, plywood or something, and it put the business out, right? So sales did their job. They sold all these pre-units. Marketing did their job. They brought all the people to sales. Customer experience did their job. They had all the people come, signed up. They had the people getting emails and letters and notices, but demand didn't do their job. And so thinking it again, like if you go back to point one, allowing building up your employees, building up your teams, you go back to point one and tie it in with this idea of workflowing and mapping out every single item that's being sold and where everything's coming from, fully understanding that supply chain, and then having all those conversations with all the suppliers. It's a ton of work, but again, it doesn't just help you through recession. When you come out of recession, now you have your fully formed demand center to push through, to grow, to put out, I don't know, 100% more widgets for the next period. And that is really, really key. I mean, it's kind of hard to say that this should be point four. It almost should be like 0.12. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. It amazes me how agree with you. Like companies, 10, $20 million, the supply is, or the supply function is done by the executive. Like talk about a technical job that should be passed on to somebody of technical knowledge and who's in detail, but addressed by visionary quick start minds. They go, oh, just call, like you said, just call Steve. He'll get it sorted out. We think it's a big relationship, but really it's a technical job. It is 100% technical job. So, one more question on this. How do people, and it's going to lead into point number 5 of cash flow. How do you pass on? Do you pass on? Should you pass on all these costs to the client?
Oh man, that's a yes and no, right? It depends where you're at within your cycle. There's inflationary costs that do need to be passed on to the customer every single year, but it's very dependent on your demand. So let's use like 2 different examples. For consulting businesses, if we have a wait list because we're in such high demand, because what we're doing for our clients in the middle of a recession is helping them grow a bit, not only save their businesses, but grow, then absolutely we should be raising our prices, because it's going to allow us to work with the people who are most serious about it. If you're in a product-based company, or a manufacturing-based company where the demand is starting to slow down, you have to be very careful on what you're doing with your prices. I kind of left out price specifically because it's such a huge topic. But price in a recession, people become very price sensitive, right? So in a pretty classic, like whether you're doing a price increase or a value increase. So in a inverse example of that is like all the candy bars now, they're still like $1.50, but they've gone from 68 grams to 54 grams. They look the same, but they're
Mm-hmm.
smaller. That's a way to stay at the same price, but you're offering way less value. So it's again, I hate it's such a I feel like I'm copying out, but it's such a hard
I
thing to
know, but
say
that's
as a blanket statement because it really depends on what your customer's looking for. If they're looking for a candy bar and you can but they have to be $1.50 and you can't sell it profitably for $1.50, then you're selling a smaller candy bar. But
gotcha.
a really good example of that is
That's
Midday
a
Squares. They're a bar company, a kind of a chocolate protein bar company, really good, out of Eastern Canada, I think Montreal. They've been doing really well, growing pretty steadily the last few years. Still small, but they had a big, huge honking bar, and they went down to a single square. And they said it was because this is the overwhelming demand they get from customers is to have the single bar because it's less calories, it's less money. I think it's there's definitely
mhm.
part of that, but I think it's they were planning ahead because they knew with inflation of their product, they're all organic and things like that, is that that bar was going to go to
Mhm.
$6, $7. No, not many people buy $6, $7 protein bars. So if they drop it down to the single square, they keep it at 265 or 27, whatever it is. Um,
Yeah,
Really
yeah.
smart demand planning. Keep the demand high. Yeah, you're going to lose customers that are like, the value is too low. I only get one bar, but you're going to bring in new customers who are price sensitive.
One thing, and we'll cover that probably is making sure that your break even. Your break even. There's too many companies that don't understand what the break even is. So in regards to price sensitivity, I think what Dylan is capturing is make sure that you understand your customer, your client, your consumer to make sure that is it a price sensitivity, a value, right? I think of people who are going to go buy eggs, right? If you're in a recession and your wallet is stretched, what are you going to buy? A dozen eggs that costs $5 or a dozen eggs that
Mm-hmm.
costs $8?
Mm-hmm.
The question is clear. You're going to buy, and you might go to $5, $6 because you say, well, I don't want, factory farm eggs. I want organic eggs or free range eggs, but you're going to go, maybe one step above. You're not going to be 12. So you have to be really cautious in those
Mm-hmm.
sense
Yeah,
and
and that's
things and
where
sense.
going
That's for
back to
sure.
marketing, right? Understanding your customer journey, your customer personas, key elements for this type of price management.
Yeah. Which brings us to point
Which I feel
number
like
four.
I've talked about throughout this entire thing, which is why I wanted to leave it for the end. Um, yeah, it's kind of all cash flow management, right? It is the
Yeah.
recession. I mean, I don't know if it's a literal definition, but there's less cash out there. Companies who are trying to raise money
Yeah.
are it's tough to find cash. Um, Consumers spend less, businesses spend less, right? So if you're a marketing agency and 80% of businesses cut their marketing budget, you're now competing for less dollars. Um, in growth
Mm-hmm.
times in bull markets, we're all a bit loose with our money. We're trying new things, we're experimenting, we're growing. And
Mm-hmm.
now it's taking all the things that we've talked about over the last, what is it, 50 minutes or so, um, taking all those ideas and working them into a cash management strategy. The best way to do this is if you're a single owner operator, a small company, is hire an external CFO to set a plan. It doesn't, you don't
Mm-hmm.
need to hire them to be on board for the whole time, but set a cash management plan in place. Take a course, learn how to do it yourself. In bigger companies, anything over 5, 10, you probably have some sort of controller. And this is what you should be talking about with them. Your controller should be working on strategies of cash flow. At URGEO, we talk with clients a lot about scenario A, B, C, and sometimes D. So it's okay, here's projection one, that's scenario A. If scenario A doesn't work out by this point, well, then it's scenario B. And if scenario B doesn't work out, then at this point it's scenario C. What do we do at each of these scenario points to protect the business? And yeah.
We always say, because we're operators by nature, sometimes you have to make bold actions to make sure that you do the things and speak the things that build efficiency within the organization. I always say the ship comes, say people first. I 100% agree with it. Without a boat, there is no people. So without the business, if the business doesn't survive, if the boat's not taken care of, then there's no boat to float on. So the company is not is going to dissolve. So it is critical that you understand a couple of components. I think understanding your break even for the smallest project, price per X. So what does it cost me break even to produce this or this service so that I can survive? That's number one. Number two, once you understand that, then you've got your projections according to what Dylan mentioned in, I think, one or number two in marketing. Okay, so if we have leading indicators of what we need to keep on doing that will generate this amount of cash, then we know what our buffer is to be able to address the whip, the logistics, the key issues, so that you've got protection that you can calculate very accurately. So how much money do you need if you have your break even, your logistics, and all of that calculated? Well, I know that I've gotten enough money in the bank for 120 days, right? And so people know I have to keep that amount to survive another 120 days. I mean, it's not as draconian as COVID, but you can adjust back and forth. And instead of saying cost cutting, it's building efficiencies within the organization to be able to not just survive, but thrive in a recession by keeping your eye on the budget.
Yeah, and it's a great tool too for people who are thinking about raising capital in the future. I wouldn't recommend it this year, but in the next couple of years, is the first thing that a investor is going to do is ask you, what's your runway? Right? What's your runway? What's your cash flow? 90 days, 120, 6 months, a year. You don't know that answer off the top of your head and never get that check written to you. So it's something that everyone needs to be focusing on super tightly. And I love Martin's approach to it of, what is the cost of things we sell and how do we build that in? And then for a lot of owner operators, so, URGEO works with kind of two size clients, a smaller 1 to 5, and then over 30 million. And those 1 to 5 clients, don't forget to figure out how much you're not being paid. So everyone, owner operators are working, 60 to 80, sometimes more hours a week, and they're paying themselves equivalent of like below minimum wage. And so when you go to hire someone, and all of a sudden none of the metrics or none of the projections make sense anymore, it's like, because you weren't calculating how much you're not being paid.
Yeah. What's the fair market value of a president of a company this size? And you're like, well, I've done this for 5 years. Yeah, but I'm not you, right? I'm not.
Yeah.
I'm an employee. I think.
Employees won't work for free. So
that's for sure. The one thing that Dylan does really well that I want to really recognize in the strategy that's associated with all of this is that Dylan puts time aside to really be strategic. And so when we put all of this key component, it's about being able to project yourself in the future. What is anticipated? Knowledge dispels fear. And Dylan and working with URGEO, what you get from a chief strategy officer, or by bringing somebody that can really project the future, is it has to be done. The function has to be done. Either you do it or you hire somebody else to do it. But what does the road ahead look like? How can you plan a trip to drive from LA to Florida if you don't have an idea of what the distance you need to cover? I mean, you can, if you want to go on an adventure, it says, I don't give a shit about what I'm going to do tomorrow. We'll see what happens. That's great if that's what you want. But if you want to survive and thrive, you need to say, well, okay, that's going to be, 3,000 miles. And those 3,000 miles, I'm going to do this much. So there needs to be some vision of where you're going to be and what you put yourself in the future. Dylan, what is the one book, one resource, one website, or a couple that you would suggest the audience to read or look at as in and around the subject we just covered?
Knew you're going to stump me at some point. On strategy, I mean, the old school like MBA stuff is all Peter Drucker, Harvard Business Review. That stuff's all great to know the basics out of. I should have a book right behind me called Influenced by Robert. I don't know how to pronounce it. I think it's Cialdini or
Okay.
Cialdini. Anyway, it's called Influence. If you Google like top marketing or brand or strategy, well, maybe not strategy, but branding books, it'll definitely come up. Influence is very well known. The reason I recommend that over a specific strategy is because of what we talk about with marketing, building community, building fans. Read that book. All of a sudden, if you haven't read that book, you'll understand everything, the key components of marketing, and especially key components of modern marketing. Um, Specific strategy again, like yeah, Drucker is pretty hard to beat. He's the classic. It's like people don't like to recommend him because he's so like unsexy nowadays. Because it's all like what MBAs read, but yeah, it's the best
That's
there
where,
is. I
yeah,
think.
that's where if that's the top. Um Inc. I guess Inc. and Harvard Business Review, good places to get information and take the time to read.
Yeah, I read. If it's kind of like a comparison for me for Harvard Business Review is like Wikipedia. Like
Mm-hmm.
you can't use Wikipedia as like a base
Mm-hmm.
for your well, as you use sorry you do use it as a base for your knowledge, but you shouldn't use it as like gospel, right?
Gotcha.
But on the bottom of Wikipedia pages there are all these great resources, a lot of them primary resources that the writers of that Wikipedia page used, right?
Pulled.
And so
Okay.
Harvard Business Review is kind of the same thing to me, um, where it's like there's so much stuff, but in the bottom, in the appendices or little links throughout the the article or whatever you're reading, is where like the real action is at. So it takes a bit of digging. I think obviously Harvard Business Review is very much geared towards bigger businesses. They don't do a great. I don't think they do a great job writing realistic articles for entrepreneurs. Um, just because it's like the really hard things to do, right? They write like 5 points. I shouldn't say five
Yeah.
points, but they write 5 points of like of huge things, like
Yeah.
just hire a C-suite team, and like that could cost millions of dollars
Millions
and
of
take
dollars.
years to do, right? And they just like that's what you got to do as your next step. Like, yeah, okay.
The key thing that Dylan is saying, if I may kind of put a synopsis around, is do your own research. Pull of all information from different places, and nothing is true, nothing is false. Take it
Mm-hmm.
and absorb it and use it for what you think is best for your business. But ultimately, the behavior that I want you to have as a listener is make the time to take time to be able to look, to read, to plan, right? Continuous improvement cycle, plan, do, track, adjust. Planning and tracking is all strategic, doing and
Mm-hmm.
adjusting is all tactical. So if
Mm-hmm.
you're a leader and if you're only doing and adjusting, then you're just surviving. If you want to thrive and really be at the top end of your game when you go through it, but not just during, but through the recession, just make sure that you make the time to research.
Absolutely.
So, with that being said, my name is Martin Hunter. I am the host of What CEOs Talk About, where we translate strategy into frontline operations. Please like, subscribe, and click the notification bell to let you know when the next episode comes out. Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in to What CEOs Talk About. Make sure to click subscribe to get notified about future episodes, or check us out at www.whatceostalkabout.com.